Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Checkdown Pod. On this podcast, we'll discuss all things NFL. We'll start every episode with the check-in, where we'll highlight takeaways from previous week's games and news. Then we'll be throwing the red flag, a segment where we'll give our hot takes and then discuss. Finally, we'll conclude with the rundown, where we'll preview upcoming games and possible storylines. I'm Richard, your host, and here's Harry, my co-host.
Great slate of games this week. I'm ready to just jump right into it. And let's start off with the first game chronologically, Niners-Seahawks. I took a lot out of this game, but I think the main thing I want to talk about from this game is really just kind of the Brock Purdy situation and how, I think everyone else feels a little bit different towards Brock Purdy than the way I feel about him.
What's your take from Brock Purdy?
Listen, Brock Purdy, there's a lot of good. I don't want to just focus on the bad, but I think where I differ from the public is more so in the bad. So I'm going to start off with the bad, and then I can bring in some of the good because there is a lot of good. I think he's been overrated. And the reality is, when you look at, the way he played, I could have been the quarterback in the Niners offense there, and I think they still win this game. When you look at the stats, there's only one big time throw according to PFF. There's a lot of yards after catch. There was a Debo play. McCaffrey got them in with a 70-yard run. There's a lot of opportunities where they were just kind of in the red zone, or they just scored like off of a 70-yard play. And I don't think Brock Purdy had so much to do with that. But with that being said, I do think, he controlled the ball well. He still had zero turnover worthy plays. He was pretty accurate for the most part. And he did a good job of extending plays. So he gave a good baseline floor for the Niners to be able to win, but I just don't think he did anything so exceptional.
No, I agree. I think even if you look on the Twitter side, there would be a lot of hyped up, either on the NFL accounts or one of the big football accounts was showing a throw. It was like, what a throw by Brock Purdy. When I think it was Debo. He just he had him wide open on the left sideline. He led him right into the safety.
Yeah, and I think it was Juwan Jennings.
Oh, maybe it's Juwan Jennings. Yeah,
very, very random player. But yeah, just it wasn't a great throw. And
I definitely agree. When you look, Brandon Ayuk has been one of the best receivers in football this year. I mean, if you look at it, the separation he's creating, he's doing a lot of great things. And obviously Debo is great. And they traded for McCaffrey, who is kind of having a little bit of, I don't want to say resurgence, but looked like when he was in Carolina, things might be going downhill. And now he's the catalyst behind this Niners offense.
Yeah. And I think McCaffrey's also allowed them to just be so versatile. Like, there was a spread chart showing where they lined up Kyle Juszczyk, Debo Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey, and it was all like the same spots, just them rotated. And it's so hard for defensive coordinators to game plan on what you're going to do with those three. And it's making the life of Brock Purdy so easy behind that offensive line with that defense. He doesn't need to do so much for the Niners to win, which doesn't necessarily mean that he would be playing bad just because it's an easy situation. But I also think that there's a lot of examples of him just doing the bare minimum.
Yeah, it's interesting to discuss. We'll get to this later in our take segment, but is the Shanahan offense user-proof? Can you plug in any quarterback and can they still succeed with that team and the way the scheme is drawn up? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, very.
And anything from the Seahawks side of the ball? Anything you liked, you didn't like?
I would say, first of all, DK Metcalf is unbelievable. He's a little one-dimensional, which I don't think gets talked about enough, but he's so good at that one thing, which is just being so big and so much more athletically gifted than everyone else.
He's just he's an alien. You don't see that speed at that size.
It's unbelievable. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. And I think just him and like Tyler Lockett. Like I think the Seahawks, I know Tyler Lockett's old, but I think the Seahawks are in good hands with kind of that offensive core and Ken Walker and all that, like surrounded by DK. And in addition to that, I think Geno, he didn't play exceptionally, but he didn't play all too bad either. And so, I think, pretty good game for the Seahawks. No one expected them to win. This is a great way for them to end their season. And I think they came out of this season having a lot of things that nobody expected them to have. They have direction. They have a quarterback. They have, well, Geno's kind of just 1 year, but like I do think he can repeat this. I don't think this is a fluke.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. He looked really good this year.
yeah.
And
Um,
like it's ways away from even seeing him years ago with the Jets and even last year when he filled in for Russ. Like he's playing at the quarterback at an above average level, which if you can get that out of Geno Smith, I think the Seahawks are very happy in what was supposed to be a rebuilding year.
yeah, and they still have, I don't know what it is exactly, but I think like some sort of top 7 pick. It might even be earlier, maybe top 5.
I think
Um,
I'm just gonna pull up the draft order here. Um,
Regardless of what it is, they have a ton to work on. Specifically, I think they do need to work on that defense. But the offense really just is in good hands.
yes,
Um,
when we talk about the offseason and the later dates and specifically the draft, they do have the number 5 overall pick, so that'll be an interesting spot to see what we think they should take. But yeah, no, definitely like if you could have gone into that game, then being the Seahawks and say we're going to be leading at halftime, like I think they would have taken it. And it's just clear in the second half. It was just the 49ers are the better team and they showed it, but the Seahawks definitely played a great game and they should be proud. And they're drafting, just to harp on this a little bit, Abe Lucas and Tariq Woolen down the board, getting 2 quality players. That offensive line stabilized a little bit when you have 2 young bookends with Charles Cross and Lucas. And yeah, no, it was a better game than I think most expected.
yeah, I mean, I didn't expect this to even be a game by halftime, and the fact that the Seahawks were leading, that's crazy. And I think no one's looking at the Seahawks like I think they lost like 41-17 or something. No one's looking at this like a huge loss for them. Everyone is like very happy with what they did on this season. And yeah, I look forward to what they bring next season with the direction that they're going in.
So now let's talk about what I think was probably the most entertaining game. Anything, I know it's really tough. Obviously, the Chargers blowing a 27-0 lead. That's the 3rd largest in playoff history. That stat's been used so much, I feel like, in the past couple of days. But I mean, it just illustrates how crazy it is. What do you take away from the Chargers from that game? Are there any positives?
I think first of all, Asante Samuel, phenomenal. And listen, there was the first interception was absolutely pass interference without a
Yes,
doubt.
he's getting
Um,
yeah.
he definitely got away with something, but like just I think it was his second interception. Like the way to just read the ball in cover 2, like read Lawrence's eyes. That's like that's great stuff, and he's been pretty good all season. So you feel really good about Asante Samuel. Um, and I guess this isn't anything new, but Herbert is good at football. These are the positives to take away.
No,
Um,
definitely. He's in an offense that I think that the talent around him sometimes gets overblown, especially missing Mike Williams. And without Rashawn Slater, that's a big loss. Um, that offense is necessarily not necessarily filled with talent, but he really elevates that. But
Absolutely.
he can't really do anything about the defense.
Yeah, no.
So aside from Asante Samuel, anything else on the defense, I know he turned out to be a steal with that falling, I think, due to some arm length concerns.
Yeah, just general size. He should have been a
Yeah.
first round pick, but that happens in the league.
Yeah.
I think For the Chargers, I think there's just a lot more negative to say than positive.
Yeah,
And I think the biggest negative, it has to, and listen, I like him, but it has to come with Staley. I think he's just not. He's listen. I think he's a very good defensive coordinator, and if slash when he's fired, he should absolutely be scooped up to be the DC for every team in the league. I think everyone should be considering him. Um, but he can't be a head coach. Like a lot of these like managerial decisions that he's made, and he's a pretty good game planner. Like I think he's pretty good at it, but he's just not cut out to be a head coach when it comes to like rallying the troops, when it comes to making these in game time decisions. Um, they just he's not cut out for it. He's not like he just hasn't shown to be a natural leader of men the way like a guy like Mike Tomlin is. Um,
which, by the way, Mike Tomlin, the fact that he got that, not a playoff team, so we won't spend too much time, but the fact that he got that Steelers team to the brink of the playoffs is probably
fascinating. It's
one of the
unbelievable.
most underrated coaches in football.
Absolutely. Phenomenal coach. And it's not fair to Staley to have to compare him
Yes.
to Tomlin, but I'm just saying Tomlin is kind of a guy like that who is shown to be a great leader of men and get the most out of his players, where I don't know if Staley gets the most out of his players.
Yeah. It's also interesting to look that today the Chargers they fired their offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi.
Which
So,
needed to happen for way more than just this game. But
yeah, well, it is interesting to see, though. Does that mean that Staley is safe and they're trying to use Lombardi as a bit of a scapegoat?
should be interesting. I actually don't think. I mean, I do think Staley could definitely still stay, but I don't think that this like is job security for him. I think he's still, he's still. I think they just want to give it more time because they do understand how good of a defensive mind he is and just how good of a defensive coordinator he would be. But there definitely is stuff to realize with I think his just inability to be a game manager.
Yeah, I think you see that as an interesting stat. Out of all the teams remaining, they all have coaches that were brought up on the offensive side of the ball, which I don't know if that's a coincidence, but having a good defense is really important. But with especially with these young quarterbacks, being able to get the most out of them and develop them is so important to have a coach who,
Yeah,
at the very least, have a good offensive coordinator who can lead them through it, which I think we both agree maybe Joe Lombardi was not.
absolutely not. And I do think it's more important to have a great offensive mind as your head coach as opposed to a defensive mind. And it can work out with a great defensive mind, like obviously Bill Belichick. Um, but if you just get in like if you have a great defensive head coach and then you have a great offensive coordinator, you'll eventually get into like this offensive coordinator limbo where your offensive coordinator gets hired to be the head coach of another team. And then you keep bringing in new offensive coordinators, and eventually they're not going to be good. And if you want to have a sustainably good offense in the league, I do think you need to have a great offensive mind for the most part. There are definitely exceptions to the rule. But I think more often than not, defensive coordinators should not be as on the table for head coaching vacancies.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later with the Giants game, but
Exactly.
what Brian Dable is able to do. But
Yeah,
he
that's
also,
the first guy in my mind.
yeah, he has Wink Martindale with him, so it really lines up perfectly with what you're saying. Get that good veteran defensive coordinator. Doesn't necessarily need to be a veteran. You've seen plenty of young coordinators find a lot of success, but just find the right guy for defense and get an offensive minded head coach.
Absolutely.
So now I feel like we spent a lot of time on the Chargers. So anything, the Jaguars, obviously, like I think we should start with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah. What do you have to say on him?
I think that he always showed flashes of being number one overall pick worthy. And I think this year he finally, obviously at Clemson, he was generational talent, definitely deserved to go number one, but he hadn't really necessarily lived up to that. And quarterback, hardest position to play coming into the NFL. So I don't blame him for that. But this year, he really showed that he could be a top 10 quarterback in this league. He played that well down the stretch, especially. And even the resiliency in this game to have that very poor first quarter. He looked like uncomfortable in the pocket. I know he got unlucky with the tip passes, and his receivers might have been getting held a little bit, but that second half was incredible.
Yeah. And I do think like how poorly he played in the first half was definitely overstated by the box score. Like those 4 interceptions were not really for like I think PFF only graded him with 1 turnover worthy play.
I mean, even just watching that makes sense with
Yeah.
the way that Asante Samuel, I mean, he's just a great ball tracker.
Absolutely.
So some of those, not necessarily, you wouldn't expect him to be taken the other direction.
Yeah. And
So,
I do think like overall, he like what was happening there, like there were some where it was like, was it on the receiver? Was it on him? Other than the, I think, second Asante Samuel interception
yeah.
on the drag route. That was fully on him.
Yes.
But just like the resiliency to come back as a second year player in your first playoff game, with a like the team around him is generally pretty young, with your first year head coach who's done a great job with them. I was not a Doug Peterson guy when he was on the Eagles, but I've kind of turned around with what he's done with the Jaguars. And maybe that's just because Urban Meyer is so trash that like the spectrum is whatever. But
yeah. Speaking of Urban Meyer, how about we're gonna use Travis Etienne like Kadarius Toney. How about just using him like a conventional running back? Like he had a great game.
Phenomenal game. And that's how he should have been used all along. He was a great running back coming out of college who obviously had great receiving skills and should have been used with those receiving skills. So like I understand putting him in the slot, occasionally, because why not try and confuse the defense with, packages like that.
Yeah, we definitely saw the Niners do that with a lot of success this week against the Seahawks. We're using McCaffrey in the slot and Eli Mitchell in the backfield. That creates a lot of confusion. But when you just don't have the guys running the ball, James Robinson was solid in his time there, but now it's really just a one-man show in that backfield with Etienne, and he's earned it.
Exactly. Yeah, he's definitely earned it. And great game by him. And I also think the fact that the Jaguars were able to slow down the tempo and continue to, they were playing fast paced because they were playing behind, but they weren't forcing it. They would still run the ball when they felt like they needed to, and they would still, they were very calm and composed. I don't really know what they came out of halftime with the speech. Like, I don't know what Doug Peterson could have possibly said, but it did feel like they were very composed and just ready to play that second half like it was 0-0.
Yes, definitely. And that defense, the way that came out in the second half, and they just completely, I mean, you give Trevor Lawrence a lot of credit, and rightly so, but the way that defense just stood up Justin Herbert and that Chargers offense, specifically Josh Allen is, I know
he's been phenomenal down the stretch.
He's been phenomenal. He's the constant pressure that he's putting on the quarterback is,
it's unbelievable.
I forgot how many pressures PFF gave him this week, but he seemed to always, even though he wasn't getting, I don't think he had only had 1 sack, but he seemed to always be making Herbert's life uncomfortable.
Right. And I think it was in the double digits for his pressures this week.
Yeah.
So great game.
That's you don't see that often. And another takeaway from this defense, I think, and then throw it back to you, is Tyson Campbell looks like he could be a really nice corner.
Yeah. There. He's been playing great, and I was not even a Tyson Campbell guy. Like going into the draft, I did not like Tyson Campbell. I thought he was a great athlete who just wasn't good at football. But sometimes that works out. Sometimes there are great athletes who, with coaching, they become good at football.
I'm sure the Jaguars are definitely hoping for that with Trayvon Walker.
Absolutely. That's another example of a guy who I was lower on. It hasn't worked so poorly for me so far, but obviously. That year too
I
can
I
definitely
think
prove me wrong.
he played okay this
Yeah.
this game. It wasn't as apparent as sometimes where he was just seemed to be non-existent on the field. I think he made a couple of plays and was in the backfield a couple of
Yeah.
times. Um,
So overall, just great game from the Jaguars. And even if they go nowhere in the playoffs following this, you have to feel good about what they did today, just picking up their first win in this kind of like Trevor Lawrence era, Doug Peterson with those guys. And next year they're getting Calvin Ridley.
yeah, that's definitely. I mean, people forget because of the suspension, but Calvin Ridley before the stepping away from football and then the suspension, he was probably a top 20 receiver in the league.
Yeah, I would even say top 15.
Yeah, his route running ability is
Very, very good.
you don't see that a lot. Um, the technician with his like still probably above average athleticism.
It's great to see. And if you're in the AFC South, you have to be afraid of that team, especially because it's a pretty weak conference. Like I don't think the Titans are pretty okay.
How the Titans continue to win every year is
it's a testament to Vrabel.
Yeah, I think that's an example of a defensive coach, and you see how his defense, the Titans' defense, and Derrick Henry wins the games for them.
And Derrick Henry.
And Derrick Henry. But no, so and before we leave this game, I just want to, as a Giants fan, what about Evan Ingram? Seeing him succeed.
I'm happy for him. Listen, it didn't work out with the Giants. I wish it would have. But I think, he's finding a place where he's going to be utilized, and he always had the talent. He just I think he needed a change of scenery. He needed confidence, which he was lacking in. And now that he has all that back, I think he'll be a very above average tight end.
Yes, and I think you're especially seeing that versatility that it feels like maybe the Giants didn't use enough of when you see
Right.
the Jaguars putting him in the slot, which he's not really the conventional tight end. So let him
He's
have
like
those.
6'3".
Yeah. Yes.
Like 217.
Yeah, he's really just a big wide receiver. And so using him in line as a conventional tight end or in the slot, it just creates a lot of mismatches. And I think the best thing for him probably, and for the Jaguars, would be for a reunion there.
I agree. Shall we segue to the Bills versus Dolphins?
Yes. A game that very few thought would be even competitive after the first half was quite the opposite. It was almost remarkable how the Dolphins were able to hang in there with a banged up offense. Obviously, no Tua. Skylar Thompson at QB. What did you think of him just to start?
I think he was definitely like inconsistent. Like you could tell that he was not a starting quarterback, but he was also dropping some nice passes in the bucket. He had that pass to Waddle, which I think Waddle hurt his ribs on that play.
Yes.
But that was mildly underthrown, but that's a pretty nice hole shot. You can't complain about it. He didn't come down with it and whatever. But like overall, he just didn't look terrible. He looked competent enough to win. And yeah, I'm not like I think he should not be a starter.
Yeah.
I don't even think he should be a second string quarterback. But overall, he played better than I expected.
Considering how close the game was, I mean, obviously, if you have Tua, you never know, but could have made the difference in this one. But he definitely, I think the traditional box score doesn't illustrate how he kept his team in it and he kept it competitive, which is with the state of the Dolphins team, it's pretty impressive.
Very.
And anything else you want to talk about on the Dolphins side, offensive side of the ball or defensive?
I think overall, it's a good way to go into next year. No one, I'm pretty sure the spread was 13.5 for them.
Yeah.
And they more than covered. No one was expecting them to play as close as they did. So I think, and it's a lot to build on because if Tua comes back, they looked pretty good with Tua, even though I'm not the biggest Tua guy. Like I think Tua's accurate. So if you can kind of hide his arm talent issues and like some of the other issues that he has as a passer, and he's a great red zone guy, I think they'll be very good with Tua back as long as he's able to come back.
I think, the Dolphins seem optimistic that he'll be able to come back. And I definitely think when you have wideouts like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, it's pretty easy to hide his arm weaknesses when those guys after the catch.
Exactly. Tua should be fine in that offense.
Yes. And then just to stay on the offensive side for a second, what do you think about, I know some craziness, people were calling for Mike McDaniel's head. After 1 year in a pretty, I'd say one of the better divisions in football. I think you just got to give him a shot. What he did in San Francisco was incredible. I think that this Dolphins team probably performed right about where their roster dictated, but I think definitely for the beginning of the season, Mike McDaniel looked like the future star head coach that everyone thought he was going to be.
Yeah. I think with Mike McDaniel, you kind of come into a similar situation with Brandon Staley, where you're going to have to question some of his head coaching moves where it's just like, what are you doing? Where he did a formation sub with like 13 seconds left on the play clock. Like that was outrageous. But I think with McDaniel, there's two things that I find different. One, I think it's a lot harder to come across a head coach that's as strong of an offensive mind as he is.
Yes.
And having that is just so important. Like they're also not in this game at all without Mike McDaniel. So he may have to some extent taken them out of it in the end with some of his head coaching blunders, but they're not in the game at all if his coaching schemes, I think just overall, and they're not in that position this season. Like with Tua out not all year, but with how long Tua was out for, they should not have been in the position that they were this season. So I think he's definitely earned. I mean, no, I don't think they were considering firing him.
No, I think that was
definitely earned that second year. And yeah, I think he'll be just fine in Miami.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what the Dolphins looks like. How do they really trust Tua's health, and without their first round pick being forfeited, and then I believe from the pick they had gotten from the 49ers was used in the Bradley. In the Trey Lance trade, they flipped that for Bradley Chubb, who now if you want to just talk about the defense for a little bit, or we can move on to the Bills, whatever.
Defense was it was like there was like the biggest problem with the defense was that cover zero blitz. That was one of the most egregious things in NFL history.
Reminiscent of I'm blanking on his name right now, but the Jets DC in 2020 with the tank for Trevor was full against the Raiders, just Hail Mary situation, sending everyone to ensure that the Jets maintain the position at number one.
Yeah, it actually looked like that. And it was, to some extent, it was even worse because there was zero disguise to it. There was they just had 8 guys in the box on 3rd and 16, I think it was. It's just you don't need to do that.
Also, the fact that even if you're very confident in your secondary, which I think they are, but I don't know. Xavier Howard doesn't necessarily look like the same guy. I think on his interception, he kind of got beat, but that ball was I think Emmanuel Sanders just kind of pulled up, which I didn't understand that.
Yeah, it
But
was.
yeah, no, my one takeaway from the defense is Javon Holland is really, really good.
Yes, Javon Holland. I think Oregon. This is a rant for another time, but I think overall Oregon just does not use their players very well. Like between Justin Herbert and Javon Holland, they were using like they would just not play Javon Holland at Oregon. Like he would show so many flashes and then he just wouldn't play. They would like hide him in their defense, and it was so dumb because why would you hide Javon Holland, who's so good?
And especially when you're
Um,
not like a powerhouse recruiting school that has like that Georgia defensive line where you have
exactly.
15 future first rounders. Ooh, why are you like not using your best player on defense?
Yeah, and it's just overall, I don't like Oregon as a school for the way that they develop their talent. But yeah, that's a whole separate rant. Um, on to the Buffalo Bills offense, which listen, it's I still have faith in it. And I think that this was somewhat of a trap game for them. So I think a lot of people are overreacting. And this is kind of like the worst they could have played, and they still won. But I
Yeah.
think it it doesn't show because we already knew this, but it highlights how volatile Josh Allen is. And it only takes one volatile Josh Allen, like one bad Josh Allen game, and one amazing Mahomes or one amazing Joe Burrow, um, or to be honest, even one amazing Trevor Lawrence game. Like all the
Yeah.
quarterbacks remaining are so talented that it only takes in the AFC. So it only takes one Daniel Jones. We'll
We'll get
get
to
to him.
Daniel. Yeah. That's a interesting case.
It is an interesting case. I think it only takes one bad Josh Allen game where it's just Joe Burrow, who's just a much more steady player, and Patrick Mahomes, even who's a little volatile, but he's even more steady. And Trevor Lawrence has been more steady, even like it's just none of them reach the peak that Josh Allen reaches. So I'm not saying they're all better, although Patrick Mahomes is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I just think it highlights where the Bills will struggle. And as much as they'll succeed because of Josh Allen, they could also fail because of Josh Allen.
Yes. I think that's if you're gonna have live with that amazing upside that Josh Allen has, sometimes he just lets the ball rip downfield and that can lead to turnovers. So
Yep.
you got to live with it. It wasn't his greatest game by any stretch of the imagination. I think the box score, even though it's not too pretty, it paints a rosier picture than how he played. Um, but yeah, anything else from this Bills offense?
Not much. I would just say I think I really like James Cook as a as a football player. Not much to say. He moves very nicely. He's got good acceleration. He's very good top end speed, and overall, I think he runs with purpose, which sounds kind of whatever, like nothing. Um, but it's just like every step he takes feels calculated, and I think he'll have a very strong future in
Yeah,
Buffalo.
I think that they should definitely. I mean, depending on what they do, the offseason and the draft. But I think if they're going into next season with similar like James Cook getting in a timeshare and like what he can bring on third downs, I think they'll be okay. They'll be happy with that.
I
Um,
agree.
I think that one thing I would take away is let's just the Bills should just get Josh Allen one more weapon on that offense because you kind of see it when Stephon Diggs, even though he had a great game and that touchdown almost with the one-handed catch on the sideline, like he played great. And obviously you got Gabe Davis, but I don't know Khalil Shakir, definitely an interesting gadget type player. But and Dawson Knox a good pass catching tight end, but in the NFL right now it's an arms race, and you look at the amount of talent that most teams are 3, 4 deep at wide receiver, and the Bills don't really they could really use that nice third guy.
Yeah. And I think the Bills have kind of been trying to find that later in the draft. and maybe
Yeah.
they need to speed that. They're maybe finding it in the 4th round, in the 5th round, and to some extent that works. There are definitely talented guys late in the draft, but I think if they're gonna find that weapon, especially for a team that's pretty devoid of needs,
Yes,
if
I
they're
agree.
gonna find that weapon, maybe the first 2 rounds might
Yeah,
be
I,
a smarter route.
I mean, they definitely have gotten lucky with Gabe Davis in the past. That comes to mind. I think a 4th round pick out of UCF.
Yep.
Like so that they showed a nice ability to evaluate wide receivers, and I mean, I like Khalil Shakir out of Boise State, so maybe there's a like he's a fun player. Give him time, but again, as you said, like they don't seem to have many needs, and we'll get discussed on the defensive side of the ball. So just make Josh Allen's offense into a super offense. Like give him all the weapons.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
any defensive takes now?
Not really. I think overall the defense is I feel pretty confident in them. I don't like it's not a Niners defense.
Yeah.
But I think that this is not a defense where you're worried about them going into the playoffs. It's not a weakness. They obviously miss Von Miller, you can tell.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But overall, I feel pretty good about it. I don't have much to say.
Yeah, I think my only takeaway was that Tre'Davious White looks like he's fully recovered from that ACL injury. I thought he had a very nice game, especially like I thought that like the way they were able to lock down Jalen Waddle. I don't think he was traveling with Tyreek Hill. I think he just stayed on his side, but to contain Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle to less than 110 yards combined or 120 yards combined, it's pretty impressive.
Very.
So now let's move on to the Sunday afternoon game with your Giants against the Vikings. A game that I think both you and I thought the Giants had a good chance to pull out the victory.
Yep. I thought the Giants would win, and they obviously did pull through. And I think it comes down to one man, and it's not Daniel Jones, and it's not even Saquon Barkley. It's Brian Daboll.
If he's not unanimous coach of the year, what are the awards anymore? I mean,
yeah. I get Nick Sirianni, like best record in the league.
I mean, the Eagles
overperformed a little bit.
But
Eagles when you look at that team,
yeah, the Giants' third stringers went toe to toe with that team in Week 18.
Yeah, the Giants are throwing out Richie James, and it's like AJ Brown. It's like there's levels to this.
No,
and I think Brian Daboll is just like a generational offensive mastermind.
Yes, he was certainly a great hire, and I think it'll be interesting to see what him and GM Joe Shane can do in this full off season coming up. With a lot of money to work with and decisions. It seems like they want to bring back Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, but I mean, if Daniel Jones continues to play like how he's playing, you might have to franchise tag him because he might be getting long-term offers with significant money, which seems crazy to say in the offseason after they declined his 5th-year option.
Yep. I think the verdict is still out on Daniel Jones, and I think to some extent he took advantage of an Ed Donatel defense.
Yes. The Vikings defense did not see, and I mean, Saquon didn't even touch the ball as much as maybe he probably should have, but who am I to go after the way Brian Daboll called this game?
I don't know how many carries he had in the second half.
I think Saquon had 14 touches on the day, which seems ridiculously low, but they won and he looked great. And the fact that the Vikings still couldn't stop the Giants offense, I think is really, as you said, testament to Brian Daboll. But Daniel Jones, he did look good. Maybe I don't know if this is crazy to say, maybe the best quarterback performance of this wildcard round.
It's very possible, actually. I mean, between him and Dak Prescott,
we'll get to later. That's.
But those very phenomenal performances. And I think with Daniel Jones, what was most impressive is the fact that he did it both throwing the ball and with his legs. There actually was no stopping him, which is wild. That I just said the words that there was no stopping Daniel Jones.
Daniel Jones
But
is an unstoppable force.
I mean, he was in this game. He really was. And I think it was noticeable from the beginning because there just weren't that many Daniel Jones checkdowns. And a checkdown, name of the pod, is a very important thing in football. Like, I obviously going to your checkdown is important, but I think a lot of plays, the read was first read checkdown for Daniel Jones. And you didn't see that as much. It was much more methodical, and maybe it's a lot easier to read an Ed Donatel defense than, you know, um, any other defense in the NFL. But I think Daniel Jones just looked poised. He looked, intentional with what he was doing.
Yeah, definitely. It seemed like he seemed like he had, which is not often to say behind every Daniel Jones decision, but it seemed like he had some indication, a pretty good one at that, of what he was wanted to do and help making sure it manifested on every time it seemed like he threw a pass.
Absolutely. I think another thing that I really liked from this game was Isaiah Hodgins. And I think
Yeah,
it kind of put the world on notice. I mean, I've been watching Isaiah Hodgins for the past couple of weeks, and I've noticed, okay, this guy's good, but he's actually really, really good. And he's not like I think Richie James and Darius Slayton are kind of like dayball merchants where they're like,
yes.
I don't actually think they're very good, but I think the scheme makes them look competent.
Yeah,
Like they can put up good numbers.
I think you see, especially Darius Slayton struggling to, I mean, he had the big drop that could have iced the game, but also
Right.
struggling to create separation,
Yeah.
like, is a problem for him. But Isaiah Hodgins, yeah, go back to him because
I think he's just overall a really good receiver who I think like not really good. He's not like a top 30 guy, but he's a very competent receiver that I think like he should definitely be in the future plans for the Giants because first of all, his hands are unbelievable. He's really sure-handed. He's not dropping passes, and he's bringing in passes that like they're hard catches that he's making. Um, and Daniel Jones is putting the ball where only he can get it, and it's great to see. Like I really feel confident about Isaiah Hodgins going into the future and going into this Eagles game.
yes, I think if the Giants head into next year with him as slated to be their opening day wide receiver 2, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. And I think he's a very productive wide receiver too. As sort of like a Gabe Davis type.
Yes,
They're a little different, but like
different.
they're
I don't think I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Gabe Davis, maybe considering that size, is maybe a little bit better of an athlete than Hodgins. Although,
yeah, absolutely. Hodgins
yeah,
is a limited athlete. It's not the same. It's sort of like a poor man's, but just like similar size. They're both short-handed. Gabe Davis is a much better deep threat than Isaiah Hodgins. Isaiah Hodgins kind of intermediate game. Um, but
which
yeah,
with Daniel Jones' play style, that meshes really nicely. So,
yeah, and it works very nicely. Um,
I mean,
and
if the
then
I
as
was
you were,
if you want to cut any takeaways from the defense, and then we could move on quickly to the Vikings.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think the biggest takeaway that I have is not actually about the defense. It is, but it's not about how they played. It's my biggest concern is Azeez Ojulari, another injury, because
Yes.
this guy as a pass rusher, he's so talented. As a speed rusher, and like he actually has some underrated power. Um, like he's been really good for the Giants this season, and I think him and Kayvon Thibodeau are going to be a great pair together if Azeez can stay healthy. But the concern is Azeez he came into the draft season with injury bugs. That's why he fell to the second round. He was hurt a lot of last year. He was hurt a lot of this year. And then he comes back. He's healthy for this game. You feel good about the pass rush duo that you have. And then Azeez Ojulari goes out again.
I think his absence was kind of hidden by the fact that Big Dexter Lawrence maybe played one of the most impressive defensive tackle games
in a
of
while.
yeah. I mean, I'm as a Jets fan, I was watching Quinn and Williams every week. That Dexter Lawrence's performance today or
Unbelievable.
on Sunday,
All season even, but
yeah, all season, but specifically on Sunday, that was on a big stage against what has proven to be a pretty solid offensive line.
yeah.
Yeah.
He made them look like high schoolers. It just wasn't fair. And that's going to bring me to my final point. And this is just an overarching rant. Roughing the passer has gotten so out of hand. That roughing the passer call was so dumb, and it could have cost the Giants the game.
Yeah.
Luckily, check down Cousins could not take advantage, but it's awful.
Our pod name is honor of the check down merchant, Kirk Cousins. But no. Yeah, I mean, what is he supposed to do there? Like put a pillow under his head? Like
it's outrageous.
I don't know. I know normally one of the refs does like the post game pool report, but I don't or interview. I don't know if they gave a reason if it was on like the little contact with the helmet or that he twisted him around. Like what could you even possibly see there?
And even if it was like, okay, maybe it was a little bit more aggressive than it needed to be, but you're in the final 2 minutes of a playoff game. He can't risk not getting the sack. It's dumb. It's everything. It's so stupid. And roughing the passer is objectively a good rule. There should be a rule in place for that. But some of these, it can't be like this.
Yes. So now I fully agree with that. And I think most, if not all NFL fans would agree that it's gotten really out of hand, but, any takeaways from the Vikings side of the ball?
There isn't so much. I didn't really have anything to say about the Vikings.
Yeah, I think this is kind of more of a Giants take, but Justin Jefferson was pretty much a non-factor in this game.
Yeah, and I think that's more of an Adoree Jackson.
Yeah, that's an Adoree Jackson. Jackson played great.
And they did a great job of bracketing him, and overall, just they did a great job on Justin Jefferson, who Justin Jefferson didn't play bad.
I don't think it was on
phenomenally,
him.
Or not phenomenally. He had a good game. He didn't do.
I mean, for his standards, probably not a great game, and
yeah, it's hard when you're being bracketed.
Yes, definitely he was. Yeah, I mean, I think you see that like T.J. Hawkinson, just for Vikings take, like he had a very nice game.
Yeah, he definitely took advantage of the bracket on Jefferson.
Yeah, you could see he's with Jefferson drawing the attention of the safeties. Like he took advantage of that. I don't know if there's anything else you got from the Vikings. Just disappointing game for the Vikings.
Yeah, and overall there just is kind of, I think, a limit where you go with Kirk Cousins.
Yes, so that's fair.
That's kind of all I have for the Vikings.
Yeah. Okay. So now we can move on to the Sunday night game, which was definitely an interesting one. Sam Hubbard probably still on the oxygen tank.
Still out of breath.
Anything first takeaways? We can start with the Bengals here.
I'm not so worried for their future based on the outcome of the game. I'm worried about their future because of what happened to that offensive line. But
it seems like Jonah Williams might not be playing next week, as I think Alex Kappa is also considered a week-to-week basis.
Right. And I do think where I feel good about the Bengals is that they had probably a worse offensive line than even this last season, or an equal offensive line to that last season. And they made the Super Bowl. And Joe Burrow honestly might be the best. Patrick Mahomes is better, I think. And I think Josh Allen is overall better. But I think Joe Burrow's been playing the best football over the past 8-9 weeks.
Yes. I mean, you could see it in the way that that team. Granted, yes, he does have great weapons on offense, but like with that offensive line, I mean, going back to the original meme of the Rashawn Slater, anyone wide receiver to no one at wide receiver to Jamar Chase. He's getting that ball to Jamar Chase, and it's no credit to the offensive line.
Absolutely. And the Bengals just overall have done a better job of allowing Burrow to get the ball out quickly, which is how Burrow wants to play. That's how he played at LSU, with that like kind of spread out offense and a lot less play action.
No, definitely. Yeah. And I think an interesting question, just one more thing from the Bengals offense is, what is Joe Mixon's real, like, we've definitely seen his ceiling before. What did you take away from Joe Mixon? Because I thought it was a very interesting game. He struggled in pass protection this year, so they really turning a lot to Samaje Perine on the third downs. So,
yeah, I think Joe Mixon. I wouldn't say you're worried about him, but I would say he's not, like, you went into the season feeling Joe Mixon top 10 running back. I don't know if you come out of this feeling Joe Mixon top 10 running back after leaving this game. And I think they tried to lean on Joe Mixon a little bit more towards the end of the game, and he wasn't as effective. And I think that's kind of where they ran into issues. Now, granted, the offensive line was not up to par.
yes.
But overall, I feel like Joe Mixon is a good running back. I don't think they need to change anything. And I think having Samaje Perine, who actually were teammates together at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Very fun fact. Samaje Perine feels like he's 37 for who knows what reason. But
he does. The shaved head does him no favors.
And he's got like the old, like not like old guy beard, but like the 35-year-old guy beard.
NFL old guy beard.
Yeah, NFL old guy beard. So just like overall that aesthetic really threw me off. But I feel like, overall I feel pretty good with the Bengals running back room, and I don't think they need to enhance it or do anything to it.
Yeah, certainly not their most pressing need, or even in the near the top of the list. So now I guess we can talk. A lot of the talk on the Ravens side of the ball is going to be centered around the guy who wasn't there in Lamar Jackson. But what did you think about how they played and keeping a game close that I don't think a lot of people expected the Tyler Huntley-led offense to do?
I think Tyler Huntley played pretty okay, is the way I would put it. Like, he played, I would even go as far as to say very okay.
Yeah.
He put them in a position to win, and the reality is, if they don't QB sneak with the dive over the end zone and they just hand it off to J.K. Dobbins, they might win this game. They really might.
I think that was like I'm pretty sure that was like at least 40% swing and win probability. Something like that was, it was not, I don't know what Tyler Huntley was thinking there. I don't know if it was the play design.
Just overall horrible. And I think once that touchdown was scored, you kind of knew the Bengals were winning.
I think it was also very interesting to see is, do the Ravens not trust anyone other than Mark Andrews on that offense? Like, you saw him take a handoff on, I think it was a 3rd and 1.
Yeah, I also think like the J.K. Dobbins quote you saw, where he was like, I want to. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it's something about getting more carries and more trust from the team.
I think he played well in what seemed like limited touches, although I think he had that receiving touchdown.
Yeah, like I think he does deserve those more carries. And I think, J.K. Dobbins is a big back. He deserves those goal line carries. He deserves to be able to, punch the ball in the end zone.
I think he could definitely do what Gus Edwards does. Plus, he has a little bit more elusivity than I think Gus Edwards.
Yeah. And so I just think overall he's right, and they should have leaned on. Now, should he have said that in the public eye? Probably not. But overall, I think he is right. about deserving more touches. And yeah,
Yeah. I mean, also just get the Ravens some receivers. I
yeah,
mean, if I don't know if Lamar's staying or if he's going to go. I think we'll talk about that more once we get closer to the offseason. But that team just seems to. I mean, I'm not ripping the Marquise Brown trade. Hollywood Brown for a first round pick is,
it's great
especially when you're going to
value.
have to pay him, that's great value. But the fact, and listen, I love Tyler Linderbaum. I know that Kyle Hamilton. I mean, he had a pretty nice game. If you just use him as a downhill safety, I mean, that's his role. I think he played it very nicely. Um, but still, the fact that you're not getting any weapons on that team on the receiver, I think the receiver with the most targets from that game tied between Demarcus Robinson, who I
Not
don't
very
think
good.
anyone has thought about Demarcus Robinson since Patrick Mahomes was throwing him touchdowns in the postseason. What was it? Was he on the Chiefs last year, or maybe even 2 years ago?
Maybe. I'm not
And
sure.
and Sammy Watkins, who feels like he must be like 80 years old at this point, even though
He's
I think
actually he's actually
he's
surprisingly
yeah
young. Like he
no
was
because
drafted the same year as Mike Evans, I think.
yes, I think so, because he went number 4 that year, didn't he? I mean, that was a
Something like that. He feels an eternity old.
yes. Um,
Uh,
but anyway, so yeah, so I think that's all we got from this game, unless you want to say something else about. I realize we skipped the Bengals defense or anything else about this Ravens defense.
yeah, I mean, I don't think there's so much more to say about the Bengals defense. I just think I still believe in the Bengals, and I think Joe Burrow still has that dog in him. Um, and yeah, I'm I'm very content with this Bengals performance because this kind of was a trap game. They are 3-3 against the AFC North, and they've kind of struggled against them all season. Those divisional games are always going to be closer than people think,
Yeah, the,
and
the
so
team the teams definitely have enough knowledge of each other with playing third time in what is it, like
yeah,
18 weeks, well, however many
19,
19 weeks now.
yeah,
That's always going to be difficult. Um, and the Ravens are an annoying team to play against.
absolutely, and it's a very good defense.
Yes.
So
So I guess now we're moving on to the final game, which honestly I was very surprised watching
yeah,
this game. That I mean, this is partly a take, but I'll just throw this out. Is Tom Brady still good enough to carry a team on his back in the playoffs?
the answer is no. My biggest note on this game is Brady is cooked,
He
and the
didn't.
reality is he's not bad. He's still a top 10 quarterback, but he's not Tom Brady
He's
anymore.
missing throws that I think Tom Brady 5 years ago, and even last year and year before that. Like, I don't know what happened. The Bucks, it's got a lot of talent around him on that offense. I know they're missing some staples on that offensive line. They got Ryan Jansen back last night as we're recording this. Um, but I don't know. He looked old.
He looked old, and he's kind of looked old all season,
Yes.
barring actually the last few weeks. He's looked very good,
Yeah.
which is why I was a Bucks believer. Um, but yeah, I think overall, I don't know. It might be the end of the Brady era in Tampa, which is a little bit unfortunate because it leaves the Bucks a little bit directionless.
Yes.
Um,
It'll be, again, as we get into the offseason, we start to talk about the needs of every specific team, and definitely a lot of the veteran quarterback market this offseason is going to be very interesting, with I think Brady one of the catalysts behind where someone like Jimmy G goes, or maybe even Derek Carr if he affects that market. So yeah, we'll get to that. But now let's give credit to the Cowboys. What do
absolutely.
you like about that offense? I mean, I
I
think
think I think my biggest takeaway from this game is the Cowboys, and I think this is with a lot of teams is they only go as far as their quarterback takes them. But I think the Cowboys are a different situation where it's like The Chiefs might only go as far as Patrick Mahomes takes them because Patrick Mahomes is the best player on the planet. But I think the Cowboys, it's a different situation where they only go as far as Dak doesn't drag them down. And that's not to say that Dak's a bad quarterback because he still is a franchise quarterback and he's still a great player, but he often can be bad at times. And so if you only get that good Dak, the
Yeah.
Cowboys are really good. Like the surrounding core around him, that offensive line is not what it used to be, but it's still very good. CD Lamb is amazing. That running game is phenomenal. And the defense is absurd. So if Dak Prescott has games like this every game, which is so hard to say, but if he does, I think he needs to play like this for 3 more weeks. The Cowboys could really win it all.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think Dak Prescott used to do the Hulu commercials. They really need him to play like the Dak Prescott plus plus. Like get him the Cowboys, like when he's turning the ball over, I don't think they have the talent around him. And as good as the talent is on that defense, I don't think it's, as you said, they're gonna go as far as Dak can take them.
Exactly.
And I mean, my one takeaway from this game, Tony Pollard is really good. Get Zeke Elliott off the field.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I think I like Zeke as a change of pace back.
oh, for sure. But they just shouldn't be splitting carries anymore.
Yeah, it should be like 70-30.
I think I just want to see how many snaps each of them plays, but by touches they got a very similar amount.
Yeah, and Pollard is kind of better at everything other than goal line.
But even on the goal line, Zeke did not
not have a good goal line performance. So yeah, but I think you do keep Zeke around if you're the Cowboys, and I think like that.
I mean, that contract is interesting.
The contract is interesting, but I do think Zeke is such an imperative part of why the running game is good and why Tony Pollard is so amazing. So yeah.
Any other takeaways from this Cowboys defense before we move on to the next segment?
Not for the Cowboys defense. One thing I do have is Byron Leftwich firing.
Yeah.
And I think, listen, the offense didn't look good this year, but Byron Leftwich has looked good in the past, and it's hard to separate between what was Bruce Arians and what was him, and what was maybe Brady even. But it's hard to say if he was a scapegoat or if he's just bad.
Yeah. I don't know if he's been officially fired yet, but it definitely seems like it's leaning in that direction.
Oh, I thought I saw a report that he was fired, but I could be wrong.
According to Todd Bowles right now tonight, there hasn't been any decision yet on
interesting
his status, but it definitely looks like, I think the rumors are that he's gonna go. Todd Bowles also, just like piggyback off that coaching discussion, Todd Bowles, very great guy. I think as a Jets fan, he took a lot of hate. Very good defensive mind, probably one of the best of this generation. Give him a defensive coordinator job. What he does for the secondaries is incredible. He cannot be a head coach.
He cannot. It's not in his wheelhouse. And the thing is, the defense got a lot worse too under him this season.
That's definitely a little bit concerning when you.
And so I don't really know what the issue was, but overall, it's not looking good for the Bucs.
Yeah. So now we'll move on to our next segment, in which we will throw the red flag and each give a hot take. Most likely it'll be pertaining to something this week. So Harry, you want to go give your take first?
Here's my hot take. And I'm not 100% sure I agree with like the take I'm about to make, but I definitely agree with like the underarching theme. And the underarching theme is that the Chargers need to draft a running back in the first 2 rounds. And I think the hot take here is that I think they're in the Bijan Robinson sweepstakes. And the reality is, if they have a running back who can just control the pace of the game and can just run the ball down their throats and can just be that presence, I think they win this game. And whether that's in the form of a Bijan Robinson, who's a much more complete back, or a Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name.
Yeah, it's a
Or
tough name.
or a Sean Tucker from Syracuse. Like those guys, those are like big bodied, powerful runners who can get 5 or 6 yards every carry. What I don't know exactly kind of where you feel like you need that. And this isn't a dig at Austin Ekeler as a complete football player. This isn't like you get rid of Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler's a great player. But it's just you win the Chargers win this game if they have a running back. They didn't run the ball. Austin Ekeler had what 12 carries. They win this game with a traditional running back. And I think that also helps me kind of shift my perspective on what you need out of a running back. I've always been like, oh, Derrick Henry's worse than McCaffrey because and I think at the top, like once you have the baseline level of being a very good running back as just a pure runner, I think the receiving element makes it more important. But I've always valued the guys who can't receive the ball a lot less than the guys who can't run the ball. Like I've thought higher of Austin Ekeler, not higher of Austin Ekeler than Derrick Henry, but I've put Austin Ekeler higher than maybe he should have been. And I think this has helped me kind of reform where that is, because you do need to be able to run the ball. You need to be able to take 20 carries when your team's winning and just be able to just run the ball down their throat, chew clock, get the first downs, and end the game when you're up by 30 points, bare minimum. And Austin Ekeler couldn't do that.
No, we definitely saw interesting this year because I think maybe one of the better offensive lines he's played behind in his tenure with the Chargers. At least it's interesting. He had the most yards before contact in his career this year, averaging 2.6 per carry, but the fewest yards after contact with only 1.9. So that's really, when you see numbers like that, that can sometimes be concerning. Like obviously Austin Ekeler, not a big bruising back, not expected to get too many yards after contact, but it's hard to, I agree. I think the fantasy element has definitely overrated Austin Ekeler. And I think it would have been nice to see the Chargers use someone like Isaiah Spiller a little bit more.
Right. And whether that's in the form of using another running back more often, I don't know what it is, but the Chargers need to do something, and it involves using Austin Ekeler a little bit less.
Yes, I agree. He's definitely, I think, as you said, it's a good take. It's definitely a hot take, but as you said, he's still a good player. You got to figure out some way to get the most out of him, and whether that be maybe getting someone a more traditional back, and you can use Ekeler even at times. Like the Chargers struggle if you want to play Keenan Allen on the boundary. Ekeler in the slot perhaps sometimes could be interesting.
Could be.
I mean, that offense, the way he plays is like very fun to play around with as a chess piece. But I think just the way the Chargers operate, they just don't maximize his value. And as a guy I think he's going to be going into his 28-year-old campaign next year, and what it'll be his 7th year in the league. Like running backs tend to regress earlier than most other positions. Especially, I mean, I know he didn't really carry too much work the first several years of his career, but he's been getting upwards of, I think, 300 touches for the past several years. So I don't know. It definitely becomes a concern of when is he going to, I mean, maybe we saw it this year, but really decline and be a problem for that offense.
Yeah.
And do you have anything else to say about that take?
Nope. On to yours.
Okay, I think my take is a little bit crazier. Although definitely, I'm sure a lot of people will not like that you said that Austin Ekeler. But yeah, my take is that the 49ers would still be a playoff team and probably still would have been able to win last week if Zach Wilson was their QB. And let me just say, this is not counting the fact that if Zach Wilson went to San Francisco, he probably, it's hard to say for sure, but they probably would have unlocked and really used him the way he looked at BYU. And a lot of the system for him, like the way the 49ers run the Shanahan system, it's a lot of play action, relying on the run and getting it to good weapons early, getting the ball out quick. He would have had to adjust a little bit, but disregarding all of that, the way he played this year, which was atrocious. There's no way to sugarcoat it.
Awful.
It was bad. I'm watching every single one of his snaps this year. It was hard to look at him and say he's a franchise QB. I just think that 49ers offense is user-proof at QB.
I think to some extent, I think if he was drafted by the Niners and developed by Shanahan and got to sit under Garoppolo for a little bit, wasn't just thrown into the fire, and you really got to, unlock him, I think he could have been phenomenal on the Niners. But I do think if he plays the way that he does, kind of on the Jets, and like just so many turnovers, like I think the reason that Brock Purdy is successful is he's taking care of the ball. Jimmy Garoppolo, for the most part, he's taking care of the ball. They're just not giving it to the other team. Like, I think turnovers in general are kind of an overrated stat, but I think for a quarterback on the Niners, when you have those playmakers around you with that line and with that scheme, just keeping the ball, like protecting the ball is the most important thing. And I think Zach Wilson does struggle with that. And so I think he would have adjusted well, and he would definitely bring down the turnovers in that system. But I do think overall he still struggles with that, and that might have been an issue for him.
I think definitely it's a kind of crazy thing to say when comparing the number 2 overall pick to Mr. Irrelevant, but the ceiling would not have been as high this year had like how far they could, how far the 49ers could go, how deep of a run they could make if they had Zach Wilson instead of Brock Purdy right now. But I do think that just how good that defense looks, and if you just get the ball to Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, I think that you'll find a way to win games.
Absolutely. And I do think, like, I'm a Zach Wilson truther. I actually think he's still good. And I think if you take him out of the Jets, take him out of New York.
Definitely get him a different situation.
Yeah, get him a change of scenery, sit him for a year, let him learn a new scheme, let him do what he does. I think he'll be good.
Yeah. And again, I think we'll definitely talk a little bit more about Zach Wilson when discussing the offseason, and especially with the Jets. Very interesting team as to what they do in the QB department, and if Zach Wilson's even on the Jets next year.
Yeah. Should be very interesting.
So now we kind of covered a lot of what we're taking away from this games and that from the slate last weekend. So that does a lot of, like, that's obviously very relevant to this week's games. But do you have anything in specific? We'll start, I guess, with the early Saturday game with the Jaguars going to Arrowhead to face the Chiefs.
I think that this one kind of ends up being chalk. I think the Chiefs, they have a week of rest. The Chiefs are on fire right now. I don't see how the Chiefs lose this game. I think Mahomes is kind of on another planet right now. He's just so far ahead of everyone else.
I think I agree. Obviously the way he played in the second half, Trevor Lawrence looked phenomenal, but he definitely did have the yips to start that game. He played in the national championship, but seemed like even in his home stadium, the playoff atmosphere of the NFL got to him a little bit at the beginning. But going into Arrowhead, for anybody, let alone a guy whose second playoff performance. That's really difficult.
Yeah. Although he's never lost a game on Saturday is still a stat in his life.
That is,
But
I
Patrick
think
Mahomes does hand out first L's quite often.
yes, yes. And I mean, we'll talk about it obviously if this is where their season comes to an end, but an incredible run for the Jaguars.
Very much so.
Okay, so now here's a game that I'm sure you'll be watching even more closely than the rest of them. In Giants Eagles. Do the Giants have a chance to pull off yet another upset?
In my original playoff bracket, I picked the Giants to upset the Eagles. And I changed it last second to the Eagles because I think the Eagles are a better team. But I think this game, I don't remember what the line was, but I think it's about 7.5. I think the Giants are just going to cover that. And I think you saw the first game, the Giants were not at all healthy. And you could really see it in a lot of plays. Like a lot of these plays are just kind of playing in my head. Like there was a play where Julian Love went for an interception and it's just he didn't play the ball on 4th and 15 or something. And it's just like I know that the next time he's gonna play the ball there. He's learned from that. And the way that the Giants third stringers played against the Eagles last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Not that that's the tell-all game, but
It
did
definitely does say a
fluster
lot.
Hurts.
Yeah.
And I think overall the Giants are just in a situation where they can kind of outsmart the Eagles, I think. And I don't think they win. I still think the Eagles win, but I think the Giants will A, make it a lot closer than people think, and B, I really would not be surprised if the Giants do pull off the upset and go on to the NFC Championship game, which if someone said that the Giants were a game away from the Super Bowl to me at the beginning of the season, I would say that they were crazy.
Yes.
But they still need a win.
Yes. And I think a lot of it does come down to if Jalen Hurts isn't, I know he's off the injury report now, but if he's not fully healthy, he's not 100%, can the Giants take advantage of that? And I don't think Daniel Jones needs to outplay Jalen Hurts for the Giants to win, but I think he just needs to be on par with that.
Yeah, and let Saquon and Daboll
exactly.
and the defense do the rest.
And now I think what should probably be the most fun game of this weekend, just with the high-powered offenses that play in two, I think we both agree, top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL going head-to-head in the Bills and the Bengals. And I kind of a repeat, and we'll see how this game goes after being interrupted last time with the Damar Hamlin tragedy. But hopefully, I don't know if he'll be able to be at this game or he'll just continue to live tweet it. But yeah, well, I mean, it should be a very fun matchup.
Yeah, and I think different separate rant. I do think that this game should be played at a neutral field.
Yes.
I don't really get why it's not. I get that the Bills have more wins, but like if the Bengals won, then they wouldn't. So, and the Bengals were winning and it was a home game and whatever. But that's neither here nor there. And
no,
I
think
think
that's
it's
a very fair
pressing
point.
issue.
Especially going into Buffalo, their fans.
Yeah, it's a hard place to play.
Yeah. So just to like that definitely is important.
Yeah. And I do think overall they should be pretty good because the Bengals, that is, going into Buffalo, because I think Joe Burrow is just kind of his own demon. He's so unfazed. He's just such a natural leader. He's so poised and he's playing on another planet right now where honestly he's looked better than Josh Allen in the latter half of the season. And so I think this game is kind of a toss-up. I think this will be probably the best game of the playoffs even.
Yeah. I
mean,
definitely could have echoes of last season where the Bills-Chiefs game was probably the best game of the playoffs. And then the winner of this game could be burnt out against a very good Chiefs team for
Right.
next week.
So yeah, I'm very excited for this game. I do think that the Bengals just edge it out. I think that they're playing so well right now, and I know that they played poorly against the Ravens, but I think it's so hard to say. I just think that they edge it out, but it's going to be a very close game.
I think for me, it just comes down to the Bengals. I know Joe Burrow unfazed, but the Bills have the home field advantage, and I think that, and I feel like just it's like the storybook ending. They got to
Yeah.
win, and they got to make at least to the Super Bowl. It's like that's got to happen. So I'll give it to. I think the Bills will eke this a win out of this one. But no, definitely will be a very fun game. And the final matchup of this weekend, 49ers Cowboys. What do you think about that?
I think the Niners kind of rout the Cowboys. And I mean, I guess it could be close. I think this is a rematch of last year's playoff game where Dak tried the spike and did not work after a QB sneak. Neither here nor there. I think this game is actually a little less close because I think the Niners are just much better than they were last year. And I think I've maybe been underrating the Cowboys for a little bit. And I just think the Niners pass rush and defense just overall gets to them. And I don't think the Cowboys have the versatility to contain Juszczyk, Debo and McCaffrey's versatility. And then Kittle's just work in the middle of the field very well. Ayuk, who I didn't even mention. There's just so many playmakers in San Francisco that I can't see the Cowboys coming out with this.
Yeah, definitely. The Cowboys could use another 3 Micah Parsons.
Yeah.
Like they got yeah, I think it really at the end of the day, I do think the 49ers will win this one, but how close the game is, and maybe even if the Cowboys have a chance, it's the tale of Dak Prescott. Which Dak Prescott do we get? If he plays like last week or close to it, then I think the Cowboys will definitely be at the very least in this game until well into the fourth quarter. But yeah, the 49ers definitely more talent. And that's it. So any closing thoughts?
Not really. Very excited for another great slate of football games this week. And yeah.
Okay. Thank you guys all for listening. From Richard, my co-host Harry. We'll see you next week on the Checkdown Pod.
Good night.